Thank you, Malcolm. I guess I'd start off by saying thank you. I'm so excited by the opportunity of going to Berlin. It's just incredible to get to spend a month focusing on one thing, because I guess for most of us, that's not what normally happens. You're trying to squeeze a variety of different things in. Obviously, I graduated 2 years ago from Edinburgh College of Art, so that tells you something right away. That have a lot of other things in my life that have gone before. And I thought it would be interesting maybe just to give you some sense of that photography is something I only came to about maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I didn't really work with a camera before. I think I've always been interested in photographs. In fact, it was one of the things I became aware of, that when I went to galleries, that I would end up in the photographic part rather than in the painting. I was never really aware of that. Maybe I never had the time to think about it. So many of the things that are on that list there are what shaped my photography now. I don't see that taking up photography as something different. In a sense, the output is very different, and it's photographs but I don't see the process that I go through as being really any different from the work I've done in the past. My life has largely been spent working with people, one-to-one or one-to-groups, usually in a developmental context, help people to maybe achieve some things that they want to do or to deal with some conflict or issues that they have. That's what I've spent a large part of my life. So I'm interested in, I guess my profound interest in is what is it like to be a human being? What is the nature of that experience? Both my own experience, but also the people that I work with. But you can see it's quite varied. School was an interesting experience in that the best part of school was looking out the window for me. And I don't say that idly. Actually, it's actually something really important and something that's still really important today, just paying attention to the world. And also the bit at the bottom is really just says about how I see my photography and how I see the work that I do. It is kind of reflective and contemplative rather than in the mix of things. Even if we are living in perplexing times and our hearts are sent hither and thither by confusing thoughts, our lives exist like a quiet prayer in some way. That kind of life cannot be violated by anyone. Should someone attempt to disrupt our existence, we must resist it at all costs. We must not consume ourselves or allow ourselves to be consumed. Our lives exist to draw close to something. It was written by a Japanese photographer, and I think the thing I like about it is it's specific and vague enough at the same time, which I think is also something that it can help to guide you. So my interest in all of my work are again, very much the same. I'm kind of interested in the idea of how opposites interplay. It's said in the West that that in terms of good and evil or dark and light, that we are driven by a desire to kind of resolve it, usually in favor of white, that the light wins. But I think what I find really interesting is maybe a kind of more Eastern notion that actually these things are always at play, the dark and the light, good and evil. And I think similarly in photography, the interesting thing about photography, when I came to photography and had that challenge of becoming more visual, I had no vocabulary around photographs. When I listened to photographers, I didn't know what they were talking about when they talked about form and shape and tonality. And this wasn't a language that I'd used. But actually it becomes very interesting because each photograph is an interplay of opposites, of light and darkness. And the skill element of photography is in some senses bringing an interesting or challenging interplay of those. But similarly in my work with people, that most people find some challenge that involves some paradox or some dilemma that is because of opposites that are interplaying in some way or other. So that's what tends to come out in my photography. This is the first piece of work it was a kind of self-portrait work that I did at art school. Which was extraordinarily challenging to go to art school and to become, in some senses, articulate. I mean that in inverted commas. I wasn't articulate, but I was trying to find words to say what I was feeling or thinking, and having to go through that process. So this in a sense is one of the big questions for me in life. What does it mean when I say I? When I say I did something, or I say something, or I think something, what does I point to? And that's, to me, one of the most fascinating things in the human experience, is the notion that we are much more than we imagine we are. Because most of us, I think, I would say in my work, what I come across is that most of us are referencing our conscious thought, and yet we are so much more than that, some of it. So what's interesting is what, in a sense, we either hide or are unaware of, and trying to access that in some way or other, trying to kind of find references and find ways to unearth it. So this next piece, the next two pieces are my two pieces that I made for my graduate work. So this first piece is, it's called Incomplete Picture, and it's kind of based on the notion of what does it mean to know someone else, or what does it mean in order to present yourself when we put on a public face. What is the nature of this? So this was a collaborative piece that was done with a lady called Margot McLaughlin, who is an actress based in Paris. So that is very much a collaborative thing, in where this was all constructed together. Even the actual moment of taking the photograph was something that we constructed together. And here what we're playing with is what Goffman, the sociologist Goffman, talked about. He used the drama model as a way of describing how we present ourselves. So he talked about offstage and onstage, so that he would talk about like when actors can slouch and when they're in the backstage, but as soon as they come onto the stage, they kind of elevate themselves and inhabit the persona. So this is in a sense what we were playing with here, the notion that she's an actress, and in a sense we were trying to find that at certain moments in time where you're almost crossing into that point where, is this real? Am I sourcing this in something that's real? Or is this something I'm putting on and playing with that moment? The next piece was, again, something I'm interested in, is that, again, something that's hidden, but this is much more in the social context of hiding. So at this time, there had been for a number of years a kind of a body of research and a number of people who were campaigning against extraordinary rendition. I mean, most of us know about extraordinary rendition in that people were taken, captured, kidnapped, and then taken to what are called black sites. So sites that are outside the jurisdiction, in this case of the United States, where the United States has got rules that don't allow torture. So people were taken to black sites. And what people didn't know in Scotland, by and large, most people didn't know that 6 Scottish airports were involved in the refueling and facilitating of rendition to black sites. And I was just interested in that fact and whether we were going to acknowledge that. So no one's disputing that it happened. What we're not doing is acknowledging that it happened. So that was a piece. So it was actually more of an installation. So it was a kind of fabricated cell with it's created by using from a section of a movie. So it's a photograph that's the exposure is 5 minutes long, and I create it by manipulating in live. So it's not done in Photoshop. It's done in real time by manipulation of films and to create a single exposure. Interestingly enough, Ruth Davison, who the Scottish people will know, actually tweeted that she thought she quite liked it. So I thought that was really interesting. At least somebody's maybe acknowledging something. So Nightwalks is my current project, which actually started here in this building with a mentoring program called the New Photographers Guild. James is here, who's one of the tutors on it, who very much encouraged me in this particular project. So Nightwalks is a kind of parallel. So the idea of the Nightwalk is the Nightwalk in cities. So the photography is taken in a variety of European cities, about 9 or 10 at the moment. But it's a kind of parallel of a psychological journey inside yourself to kind of know more of your unknown space. So for me, that was going back to where I grew up in the East End of Glasgow, where I went to school, and trying to understand how that shaped and formed the way that I turn up in life. And so there's a parallel between the kind of social construct of the city and how it shapes people, but also me writing and journaling at the same time, what that experience provokes in me and what I remember and what maybe I choose to kind of let go of. So, and that leads me really on to the Berlin work, where I think I'm going with this. So, I mean, I haven't taken any photographs, right? Obviously, because I don't go to Berlin till the 17th of September. But it's very much coming out of the same notion of the night walks idea. But in this case, it's about what do cities forget? What's forgotten in the narrative of the city? What's forgotten in the official stories? Or even the kind of individual stories that, you know, if you stop somebody in the street and say, tell me about Glasgow, what they would tell you, and what might be forgotten in certain places, remembered in other places. So I'm interested in exploring that. In psychology, there's a concept called liminality, which is almost the idea that there's, if you kind of think of unconsciousness and consciousness, if you think of hidden and what's seen, that there's this space in between where things are kind of moving in and out. So there's some things that are moving out of view and are moving into the darkness, and other things are moving out of the darkness into the light. And that may be psychologically or maybe culturally. And that's what I'm kind of interested in, exploring that notion, that idea. Because when you go to Berlin, having been there before, it has a certain, because certain things are obvious to you that other people who live in Berlin don't notice anymore. It's wallpaper to them. And then there are things that are invisible to me that are very obvious to people in Berlin. So I'm very interested in that whole idea of this liminal space and how you can. That's the same way the night walk photographs are taken. It's almost trying to inhabit that space where you can discover things. So my kind of inspirations for that, for this particular work, are a film called Hidden, which Michael Haneke, I don't know if you've seen it, it's a French film, but he is an Austrian film director. And that was similarly about an event that happened in Paris where 200 Algerians were killed, 250 Algerians, I think, were killed in the 60s. And it's kind of largely been forgotten about, and he explores that in a really fascinating way. So it's not a very obvious way. And the other one is a piece of work I saw in Berlin. It's called Interned by Mika Ullmann. And it's a beautiful piece. It's a sculptural piece where these pieces of furniture almost look as if they're either falling through the floor or emerging through the floor. And it's all about this notion also of loss and things disappearing into history or disappearing in your own personal life. That's it.